Hello everyone. We're now beginning chapter 13, which is on moral development, values, and religion. This should be section 1 of 1. Here we have Santrock's definition of moral development. It's not a bad one. Now the name that we most associate with moral development is Lawrence Kohlberg. He was also involved with research on what makes a good high school. One of the other things we remember about Larry was his death. He had done some cross-cultural research in Belize and had picked up a tropical parasite. The combination of the pain from the infection and the side effects of his medication became too much for him. After a couple of years of battling this, he parks his car on the shoreline of Massachusetts and he walks into the Atlantic Ocean. People who knew him said this behavior was very consistent with who Larry was. Kohlberg was strongly influenced by Piaget's developmental theory. Much of his moral theory is modeled after Piaget's work. He felt that we shift from external standards to internal standards. He proposed 3 levels, each with 2 stages. This is one of your handouts. This is Kohlberg's moral dilemma. There's no right or wrong answer. Your response is judged on the quality of what you say compared with Kohlberg's theory. Now, for young children, they tend to be moral absolutists. They believe that rules are unchangeable. Bad behavior is inevitably followed by punishment. It's called imminent justice. Now, a behavior, though, is judged to be good or bad depending on the consequences. So, if you steal a cookie and stub your toe, that was God punishing you. But if you steal a cookie and you end up consequence-free, enjoying your cookie, well, then God wanted you to have that cookie. At the lowest level is pre-conventional reasoning. Here, there is no internalization of moral values. It's controlled by external rewards and punishment. At stage 1, heteronymous morality, the goal is to avoid punishment. At stage 2, individualism, instrumental purpose and exchange, the reasoning here is, I'll be nice to you if you be nice to me. Now, at level 2, conventional reasoning. These are the middle layer. And here internalization is intermediate. We have moral standards, but these have been given to us. We've accepted and adopted the moral standards of others. At stage 3, we have mutual interpersonal expectations. What's important here is to follow the rules. You want to be a good girl. You want to be a good boy. At stage 4, social systems morality, we see moral behavior as that which allows a community to work effectively, and all members need to follow the rules. We hear about doing our duty at this stage. Now, you begin to see a pattern here. At the final level is post-conventional reasoning. Here, morality is completely internalized. A person has given some thought to determine what they believe is right or wrong. We start with stage 5. There's a social contract. Here, an individual feels that there are some rights and principles that can transcend the law. They will ask, does the law protect and preserve fundamental human rights? We give the example of Rosa Parks, who was willing to go to jail to draw attention to Alabama's segregation laws. These were bad laws. At stage 6, we have universal ethical principles in place. An individual feels that there are some universal human rights. They are willing to follow their own conscience. They are willing to risk their lives for their principles. Now, an interesting story of someone operating at stage 6 occurred during a scary time. There was a sniper shooting people at random on the DC Beltway. There was a substantial reward offered for information leading to the sniper's capture. Now, there was a retired truck driver. He would do occasional runs for his old company, and he's on this stretch of highway. It's very late at night. He elected to pull over at a rest stop to spend the night. Now, as he's pulling into the rest area, he recognizes the vehicle that the police are looking for. He uses his radio, he contacts the police, and then he waits. He pulls his truck across the exit of the rest area to deter the car from leaving. And he waits. Sure enough, eventually the police arrive and determine that, yes, this is the car. The driver is arrested. The driver is later found guilty. He indicated he was planning on killing his ex-wife who drove this route, and he was hoping that her death would just be meshed in with all the other random victims that he selected. Now, when the reward was offered to our truck driver, he said no, he wouldn't feel right about accepting the money for doing something anybody else would have done. That money should go to the victims and their families. Now this is a graph that shows the ages when we generally expect to reach different moral stages. If you note, stage 1 eventually disappears. Stage 6 really never appears on this. Realistically, most of us will never know if we're operating at stage 5 unless you find a wallet with a lot of money in it. And especially, we may never be in a position to see if we're operating at stage 6. From a day-to-day perspective, stage 4 keeps us functional and out of jail. Now, there's plenty to criticize with Kohlberg's theory. It's definitely culturally biased. And because moral functioning is assessed in a writing task, it's biased against those who have less advanced verbal skills. However, the biggest criticism is that it's entirely dependent on moral thought, not moral behavior. Schools have dabbled in moral education. The current, most commonly used program is character education. Usually guidance has a program on this, and they teach moral concepts like responsibility and honesty. In the 1970s, values clarification was big. Nowadays, it can get you fired for teaching it. It does not teach that a behavior is right or wrong, but has to be evaluated in terms of a larger picture, and students were encouraged to define their own values. Now, another way that we can look at moral development is to consider those that practice situational ethics. This is when you take into account the context of an act when evaluating it ethically, rather than judging it according to some absolute moral standards. Christian forms of situational ethics place love above all other principles or rules, and agape, or unconditional love, is the highest principle. Now, there's a dark side to situational ethics. Some people rely on how a situation affects them as being their core principle. They use rationalization to excuse their behavior. Examples might include parking in a handicapped place because it's raining and you don't want to ruin your new suede shoes, or you're cheating on your taxes because, well, everyone does it. Now, I'm not exactly sure why Santrock elected to put conduct disorder into this chapter. However, this is where we are. A conduct disorder is one in which there are age-inappropriate behaviors. The behaviors violate family expectations, societal expectations, and they violate the rights, personal and property rights of others. In South Carolina, as in many places, you can be adjudicated as a juvenile for a variety of offenses. Index offenses are criminal acts. If an adult engaged in these behaviors, they too would be arrested and might have to pay a fine or spend time in jail. Status offenses, however, are behaviors that are only criminal when they are performed by juveniles, such as school truancy, breaking a town curfew. The risk factors for delinquency are not surprising. Involvement with drugs and alcohol, access to weapons, access to deviant peer groups, and perhaps exposure to violent media. We'll talk more about gangs in Chapter 16. Our last topic is religion. Just some general information on this slide. Religion does become more important to many people as we get older. There is an association between our general sense of well-being and having faith. This is the end of Chapter 13, Moral Development. Next is Chapter 14, Marriage, Lifestyles, and Families.